On this edition of the Newsmakers, combating corruption or causing a crisis? We look at the Indian Prime Minister's plan to bring black money into the open. Also on today's program, questions over the qualifications of the world's most powerful woman. Is Wonderwoman really the right choice for the UN's Gender Equality Ambassador? And in Picture This, the million-strong march in South Korea against the president and her network of aides. Hello and welcome to the Newsmakers with me, Imran Garta. It was a decision intended to take money off the black market and bring it out into the open. A key part of what Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi believed he was elected to do. But his decision to withdraw India's two largest notes from circulation has had serious knock-on effects for millions of India's poor. There are limits on cash withdrawals and long lines at the banks. But Modi says it will take 50 days to make his plan work and deliver Indians the country of their dreams. Our newsmaker today is Narendra Modi, as we ask if the Indian Prime Minister can fulfill his promise to the country.
Fortune favours the brave. In India, accessing that fortune now means endless queues and the occasional scuffle. The country is in banking pandemonium, brought on by the government's snap decision to withdraw the 500 and 1,000 rupee notes from circulation last week. Those notes accounted for about 80% of hard currency in the country. People have 50 days to exchange old notes for new ones.
Thank you.
And for Prime Minister Narendra Modi, bringing that money into the banking system is a major way to stop tax evasion. Banks have to report anyone who deposits more than $3,700 to the authorities. But living costs money, and economies need transactions to thrive. Everyday activities like buying and selling food and filling up a petrol tank have become problematic because there aren't enough of the right notes to go round.
चारों तरफ अफरा तफरी का माहौल बना हुआ है तो ये मोदी जी का सर्जिकल स्ट्राइक ये काला धन के ऊपर सर्जिकल स्ट्राइक नहीं है ये बड़े-बड़े काला बाजारी करने वालों पे सर्जिकल स्ट्राइक नहीं है ये इस देश की आम जनता के जो उन्होंने बरसों में अपने घर के अंदर थोड़ा-थोड़ा पैसा जमा करा के रखा
India is a cash-driven society. Almost half of the adult population doesn't have a bank account. The note swap is part of Narendra Modi's pledge to crack down on undeclared income known as black money. It's estimated 2 out of 10 transactions take place outside of official channels. In other words, they can't be tracked. Since last week's note swap, the government says $44 billion has already come into the banks, and authorities can now keep an eye on those funds. Modi says this is just one of the steps to curb corruption. But has he gone too far, too soon? Natalie Pohanan, The Newsmakers.
Vivek Kaul joins me now from Mumbai. He's the author of the Easy Money trilogy. Thanks so much for joining us, Vivek. Tell me how serious a problem black money is for India.
Black money is a very serious problem in this country. And, estimates of the size of black money range from anywhere between 20% of the GDP to around 75% of the GDP. And, among other things, what it does is, it sent real estate prices in this country to extremely high levels, wherein, most people cannot afford to buy a home to live in. Over and above that, obviously, it leads to the government having to borrow more because black money is essentially money on which no tax has been paid. So all these things tend to have a huge impact on the Indian economy.
In addition to trying to tackle or target black money, Prime Minister Narendra Modi's government has said they want to tackle the financing of terrorism through the proceeds of fake Indian currency notes and use of such funds for subversive activities such as espionage, smuggling of arms, drugs and other contraband into India. It's hard not to think that that's a bit of an exaggeration. Is it an exaggeration?
No, not really. I mean, counterfeit currency is, actually a part of everyday life in India, and especially, when you tend to use high denomination notes. When you tend to use high denomination notes to make a payment, the guy who is accepting the payment tends to be very careful with it. So counterfeit currency is a part of the Indian economy, and it has been used in the past to destabilize the Indian economy. So I don't think it is a stretch at all. So
when we're looking at these 1,000 and 5,000 rupee notes in circulation, it seems to be most of the money that's in circulation. Now, the ordinary poor will be using them and not necessarily your shady, corrupt billionaires or those who might be involved in some dodgy dealings, right? Is a side effect of this that it's going to hurt the poor more than anybody else?
Yes, I mean, that is true because, ultimately, all paper money is essentially, it basically has a lot more transactional value. So what has happened is because, suddenly, 86% of the total money in the market has become useless, the transactions have all collapsed. So there is no money going around in the market. So yes, to that extent, you are correct. The poor are essentially bearing the brunt of it. And also, given the fact that, India primarily continues to be a cash-based economy where more than 80% of the transactions happen in cash. So suddenly when there is no cash going around in the market, we have a problem.
Vivek, just expanding on that point that you made, that this is a cash-based economy, can we make that context a little bit more clear to an international audience, where we can say perhaps that in India it's almost impossible to run a successful business without having to maybe bend the rules a little bit?
Actually, there is, really no connect between, what you're asking and what has happened over the last few days. So yes, I mean, in India, it is difficult to run a business without really bending the rules. But, prima facie, that has got nothing to do with what has happened, with the demonetization of the notes that has happened. So there is clearly no link between these two things. So.
Okay. Gold seems to have been doing very well since this decision. Did you expect that? And what does that mean going forward?
Right. Yeah, I mean, see, typically India has always loved gold. And, in the past, a lot of black money has found its way into gold as well as real estate. Now with, notes being demonetized, so suddenly the demand for gold has gone up. So the parallel system, which works sort of very well in India has taken on, and a lot of the demonetized notes have found their way into gold. That's one part. The second part, I think, in the future, what I see happening is that, people who held on to their black money in the form of cash up until now will be a little more careful and will probably start converting it into gold sooner rather than later. So the importance of gold in the eyes of the Indian consumer just went up. I mean, not that it wasn't there, but it sort of went up even more.
Final question for you, Vivek. Economics and politics going hand in hand or hand in glove. in many ways. Is this going to strengthen or weaken Prime Minister Modi?
See, in the short term, it has definitely weakened him because, people have had to go through a lot of trouble. People have had to stand before ATM lines. A lot of people haven't had money to meet their daily expenditure. But over a slightly longer term, if he is able to, pull it off, if he's able to achieve what he started out, in the sense if he's able to hit, people who have black money and, sort of control the counterfeiting, it will strengthen him in the long term. I mean, at least that's what I think as of now.
Vivek Kaul, appreciate you taking the time to talk to us. Thank you very much for joining us. Still to come on the Newsmakers, Wonder Woman's latest role lands her in hot water. And in picture this, the massive protests engulfing South Korea's capital. The United Nations decided they needed a figurehead for their drive to increase gender equality. And who better than the star of an upcoming Hollywood blockbuster? The only problem is that Wonder Woman is not real. She's an imaginary character, and one that appears to have come from the mind of a teenage boy. Proponents of the move say her appointment as an honorary ambassador will help the UN engage with a younger audience. But critics say it's frivolous, fatuous, and anti-feminist. The Newsmakers' Christine Provalakis reports on the unfolding controversy at UN headquarters.
Wonder Woman! Wonder Woman!
She's the most popular female comic book superhero of all time, using her bulletproof bracelets, speed, and special powers to fight crime. For decades, Wonder Woman has been seen as a global symbol of justice, peace, and equality. Now, the superhero has a new title, United Nations Ambassador. Her courage and strength is meant to inspire women and girls around the world. The United Nations announced the appointment last month at a ceremony also attended by Linda Carter, who played Wonder Woman in the 1970s television series.
Wonder Woman is being asked to take on a new role as the United Nations ambassador to empower girls and women around the world. So please embrace her.
But not everyone has. UN staff members protested the appointment. And more than 30,000 people have signed a petition saying Wonder Woman is not the right choice.
We also don't think that a fictitious comic book character wearing basically what looks like a Playboy bunny outfit is really the right message we need to send to girls, or even boys for that matter, about what strong women are in the world. We think that is a toxic message to be sending.
The UN has defended its decision, saying the Wonder Woman campaign will focus on what women can achieve together. But is a cartoon character the best choice for an international role model and the serious issues facing women worldwide? Christine Provalakis, The Newsmakers.
Joining me now from New York is Shazia Rafi. She's a former UN staff member and a women's rights activist. And from London, we have Anna Smith. She's a journalist and film critic. Thanks both of you for joining us. Anna Smith, let me start with you. Should the UN have chosen Wonder Woman to be an ambassador?
Well, I think the first thing to recognise is it's a role as an honorary ambassador, which is usually a fictional figure. So it's a kind of mascot role. It's not meant to be replacing real women. They had Winnie the Pooh before as an ambassador for friendship and Tinkerbell as an ambassador for green. So on that level, then I think Wonder Woman is an interesting, if sort of initially surprising choice, especially in view of the fact that the film is coming out next year. We're going to have a live-action Wonder Woman who I hope is going to be a more positive role model for women than perhaps some of the past incarnations of the character.
Shazia, this sounds like smart public relations. It raises awareness of the goals and the causes that the UN backs through a character that lots of young people like. What's the problem with that?
Well, there's a couple of problems with that. First, I just want to correct my title. I'm former Secretary General of Parliamentarians for Global Action, and yes, I did work at the UN decades ago as a consultant. I think I have issues with several parts of this. So let's first start with the timing. This announcement took place literally the same week as the UN Security Council rejected all very qualified female candidates for the job of the UN Secretary General, and the 9th man was announced. And at the same time, you have the UN announcing, sorry, can't be Secretary General, but you can be a cartoon mascot. So the message to women in terms of timing is terrible. The second is that while the cartoon itself in the world of cartoon and film is fine. I have raised 2 young daughters. They used to watch cartoons. The system itself at the UN needs to take women more seriously and have a much better way of doing their public relations in a more gravitas manner. I don't really like this idea of honorary ambassadors. We don't need Tinkerbell. We don't need Winnie the Pooh. You have real serious issues that the UN is dealing with, very strong, real live young women and older women who can be UN ambassadors and goodwill ambassadors. The system is, to some extent, the public relations is kind of running away with trivializing an agenda which the UN itself needs to grapple with. It's almost as if one cannot succeed at bringing peace to Syria, one cannot succeed at getting rid of gender-based violence in the middle of wars, one cannot succeed in getting rid of gender war crimes, so one is ending up going for a public relations agenda which makes, the system look good. And actually it has ended up totally collapsing on itself with this appointment.
Right. Anna, are you convinced by any of that? Because when we look at the character of Wonder Woman herself, whether it's the cartoon or the sort of physical embodiment of Wonder Woman as represented by Gal Gadot, I mean, you have a sex symbol, right? Her proportions are almost absolutely physically impossible for a woman. And Wonder Woman is a poster that's more likely to be up on the walls of a young teenage boy's room rather than a teenage girl's room. Do you accept that argument that here you have this her sex symbol status and all of that being used to basically they're trying to piggyback off the back of that success?
I would dispute the assertion that it's more likely to be on a boys' wall, because I know many, many powerful women in very impressive jobs that grew up idolizing Wonder Woman, and they saw her, as simplistic and reductive as it may seem as an adult, but they saw her as a young person, as a symbol of hope and as a symbol of, okay, in a world dominated by men, in a superhero world that we see on the big screen till today, dominated by men, there is at least hope and there is at least a chance for a character who is female to triumph. And of course, the film is directed by a woman, and it's also going to be very much more about Wonder Woman as a symbol of peace, which is kind of why I can see why the UN have come on board with this. I totally agree that there are problems within the UN in terms of representation of women within the organisation, but I think I'm taking this as a separate issue, and as a film critic, I'm encouraged to see attention for a film which is at least kind of trying to redress some of the imbalance we're seeing in Hollywood at the moment. There are only 1/3 of speaking roles go to women, so we need more films like this, and we need them to be championed and accessed by young women.
Shazia, having been to a couple of UN events, they have the best of intentions.
I would like to say something. Yeah, I'd like to say something here.
Okay, sure. Respond, and then I'll ask you. Go ahead.
No, hold on. I'd like to say something here. Okay, this is not about whether the film is inspirational to young women outside the UN itself. And I dispute the idea that the UN has come on board with it. DPI, which is the public relations branch, made this decision. It has blown up in their face. UN staff themselves came up with the petition with the input of others from civil society. That has never happened before in the UN. It was a huge embarrassment for the Secretary General. They had already committed to go ahead with that launch, so they did. At that launch, UN staff stood up, turned their backs to Wonder Woman. The issue is whether this is the right stage. It is not whether the film itself is inspirational. It's whether the United Nations, which is where the world comes to end wars, should be the stage for a cartoon empowerment. there are superheroes that are men. Why is there not a mascot for the UN Secretary General himself? There isn't, because the job is seen as a serious job. And I think that's the issue here.
Okay, point well made. And somewhat connected to it, I wanted to make the point that I've been to a couple of UN events. They have the best of intentions. As you mentioned, these are serious things, trying to solve poverty, trying to solve the war in Syria and so on. But there's often a sort of staleness when it comes to how to translate that message, particularly to the broader public. Would you maybe concede that this is the UN trying to think a little bit out of the box, and this is not too different to using the star power of Ben Affleck or George Clooney or Charlize Theron or Angelina Jolie in trying to help raise awareness of UN causes?
No, I would not concede that, because while there have been goodwill ambassadors like Peter Ustinov, Audrey Hepburn with UNICEF, Angelina Jolie on humanitarian causes, the whole system of generating too many of these celebrities has gotten out of hand at the UN. Several of us feel that the UN is unable to deliver on concrete results and is beginning to celebritize every initiative, every fund, every project by adding some kind of a figure to it, which sometimes does not even match what it is trying to do. I mean, Ustinov, Audrey Hepburn, and Angelina Jolie built real credentials with their work itself on the ground as well. Not every other celebrity that the UN is using has done so. And I think it's the public relations branch of the UN running amok.
Would you be convinced, Shazia, if Gal Gadot herself, as the actress herself, would you be more convinced or more willing to listen if she herself embarked on some of these projects and got her hands dirty?
No, I don't think so. I don't think this is a matter of, putting those poor actresses on the line and saying, can you do something on the ground? This is an issue of saying, here is an institution around the world that is, funded by our public dollars. This is not a commercial venture where, let's say, whether it's the DC cartoons or whether it's Hollywood or Bollywood, where their role is to create imagery that is inspirational to the public. Here is an institution which, if you remember, coming out of a terrible Second World War, was formed to save future generations from the scourge of war. That is what the UN Charter says. There is no way that any goodwill ambassador can make that happen. It is governments and those who hold governments accountable that can make that happen. And that is where the UN needs to put its time, its money, and its creative thinking.
Anna, are you keen on greater partnerships between the UN and Hollywood and other aspects of the entertainment industry?
I wouldn't necessarily encourage it. I think there is other much more important work to be done. But I think, as you've highlighted, that the public relations actually can be really effective and can be important. I mean, it's possible to use popular culture in a way that kind of degenerates into silliness, but it's also possible to use it and turn it into something for the greater good. And it remains to be seen exactly, after maybe a stumbling start, how the UN will, or how this campaign rather, will represent Wonderwoman and work with her as an icon to actually help. I mean, one of their kind of mission statements and one of their concerns with the empowerment of women and girls says that they're concerned that only 9% of news reports are dealing with gender inequality. Well, this has succeeded in getting into a lot of news programs, including this one. So in some ways, it's working. Okay,
Anna Smith and Shazia Rafi, that was quite thought-provoking. Unfortunately, we are out of time. Thank you very much for joining us. In today's Picture This, hundreds of thousands of protesters took to the streets in the South Korean capital, demanding President Park Geun-hye resign over allegations of political corruption. Let's take a look. You've been watching this edition of the Newsmakers with me, Imran Garda. Thank you for watching. Bye-bye.